Look at your hands right now. Those same hands with those same fingers, that same grip strength and dexterity. Humans had hands exactly like yours 200,000 years ago. They had brains the same size as yours, bodies identical to yours. Yet for 150,000 years, they made the same simple stone tools over and over again. Think about that for a moment. 150,000 years of virtually no innovation, no art, no complex tools, no apparent progress. Modern humans existed, fully formed, with all our biological capabilities, and yet they did almost nothing with them. If you are using this to fall asleep tonight, perfect. This mystery will still be here when you wake up. This is one of the most puzzling questions in human evolution. We call it the gap, the long pause, the silent millennia. Anatomically modern humans appeared in Africa somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago. We know this from fossils, we know this from genetics. The evidence these early humans had skulls shaped like ours, brain cases the same volume as ours, vocal tracts capable of complex speech, hands capable of the finest manipulation. Everything we have now, they had then. The hardware was complete. The biological machinery was fully operational, and yet the software seemed to be missing. When archaeologists dig through sites from this period, they find the same tools appearing again and again across tens of thousands of years. The Acheulean hand axe, a teardrop-shaped stone tool that humans made for over 1 million years with almost no variation. Generation after generation, making the same thing the same way. Compare that to the last 50,000 years. In that time, we invented agriculture, writing, cities, mathematics, philosophy, science, space travel. We went from caves to computers in what amounts to an evolutionary eye blink. But before that acceleration, there was this vast emptiness, this long silence where nothing much seemed to happen at all. So what was going on? Why did modern humans wait so long to become modern in their behavior? This question has haunted researchers for decades, and the answers they've proposed tell us something profound about what it really means to be human. The truth is far stranger than you might expect. The first theory is deceptively simple. Maybe they weren't really like us after all. Maybe anatomical modernity and behavioral modernity are two different things. You can have a modern body without having a modern mind. This idea dominated thinking for most of the 20th century. The argument goes like this. Yes, early humans had big brains, but brain size isn't everything. What matters is brain organization, the connections between regions, the density of neurons in critical areas. Perhaps some final neurological rewiring hadn't happened yet. Perhaps the last piece of the puzzle was still missing. Supporters of this theory point to the fossil record. They note that while skull size remained constant, skull shape continued to change subtly over this period. The forehead became more vertical, the brow ridges less pronounced. Perhaps these external changes reflected internal reorganization that we simply cannot see in fossils. But here is the problem with this theory. We found evidence of complex behavior appearing sporadically throughout this supposedly silent period. Ochre pigments used perhaps for body painting dating back 100,000 years, shell beads from 75,000 years ago, engravings on bone from even earlier. These discoveries punch holes in the simple narrative. If the brain wasn't ready for complex behavior, how do we explain these isolated bursts of creativity? Either the brain was ready and something else was holding humans back, or our definition of complex behavior needs serious revision. Neither option fits neatly into the old model. This brings us to the second major theory, the demographic explanation. What if the brain was ready all along, but the population wasn't? What if innovation requires not just smart individuals, but enough smart individuals living close enough together to share and build on each other's ideas? Think about how innovation actually works. Someone has a new idea. They share it with others. Those others improve on it. They share the improvements. Knowledge accumulates. But this only works if there are enough people around to maintain the chain of transmission. Lose too many links and the knowledge disappears. For most of those 150,000 years, human populations were tiny. Perhaps just 10,000 individuals scattered across the entire African continent. Small bands of a few dozen people, separated by vast distances, rarely encountering strangers. In these conditions, even brilliant innovations could easily be lost. Imagine you are a genius born into one of these small bands. You invent something remarkable. A new tool, a new technique. You teach it to your children. But then disease strikes, or drought, or a failed hunt leads to starvation. Your entire band dies. Your invention dies with them. No one else ever knew it existed. This pattern could repeat endlessly. Innovation flickering into existence, then disappearing. Progress made, then lost. The same discoveries happening over and over in different places, never accumulating into something larger. Not because humans weren't capable, but because there simply weren't enough of them. Computer models support this theory. Researchers have simulated populations of varying sizes and densities. They've found a threshold effect. Below a certain population density, complex culture cannot sustain itself. Above that threshold, it takes off. The transition can be sudden and dramatic. Around 50,000 years ago, something changed. Human populations began to grow. Groups began to encounter each other more frequently. Trade networks emerged. Ideas could finally spread faster than they were being lost. The Great Acceleration began, not because of biological change, but because of demographic change. But this theory has its critics too. Some researchers point out that population density alone cannot explain everything. There were periods of higher density during those silent millennia that didn't produce cultural explosions. And some areas with low density still showed signs of innovation. The relationship isn't as simple as it first appears. This brings us to the third theory, the climate explanation. What if environmental conditions during most of this period were simply too harsh for innovation? What if humans were too busy surviving to have time for creativity? Necessity may be the mother of invention, but desperation is the mother of nothing but more desperation. The climate of the past 200,000 years was nothing like today. Ice ages came and went. Droughts lasted for centuries. Sea levels rose and fell by hundreds of feet. Africa itself transformed repeatedly between lush savanna and harsh desert. Living through this required every ounce of energy humans had. Some researchers believe humans came close to extinction multiple times during this period. Genetic evidence suggests our population may have dropped to just a few thousand individuals around 74,000 years ago, possibly due to a massive volcanic eruption, possibly due to severe drought, perhaps both. When you are fighting for basic survival, you don't experiment with new tools. You stick with what works. You use the techniques your parents taught you, the same techniques their parents taught them. Innovation is a luxury that requires surplus of time, surplus of resources, surplus of energy. Only when conditions improved did humans have the breathing room to innovate. The climate stabilization that began around 50,000 years ago may have been the key that unlocked human potential. Not a biological change, not a population change, simply better weather lasting long enough for culture to accumulate. But here is where it gets complicated. Climate improved at other times during those 150,000 years too. There were warm periods, wet periods, times of abundance, yet these didn't produce the same cultural explosion. Climate might be part of the answer, but it can't be the whole story. The fourth theory takes a different approach entirely. What if we're asking the wrong question? What if humans weren't doing nothing during this period? What if we're just not finding the evidence of what they were doing? Archaeological evidence is inherently biased towards certain kinds of artifacts. Stone tools survive for hundreds of thousands of years, but most human technology throughout history has been made from organic materials. Wood, bone, plant fibers, animal skins. These materials rot, they disappear. They leave no trace for archaeologists to find. We might be looking at a massively incomplete picture. Think about modern hunter-gatherers. Their most sophisticated technologies are often made from perishable materials. Woven baskets, wooden traps, rope snares, poison, tipped darts, complex fishing weirs. If these people lived 100,000 years ago and we only had their stone tools to judge them by, we would vastly underestimate their capabilities. Some researchers now believe the archaeological record is giving us a false impression of stagnation. Humans may have been innovating constantly, but in ways that left no permanent trace. The stone tools we find might be like finding only the nails from a house and concluding that ancient people lived in piles of nails. Recent discoveries support this view. At sites where preservation conditions were exceptional, we find sophisticated objects that challenge the narrative of stagnation, carefully crafted bone tools, evidence of complex hafting techniques, residues suggesting the use of plant-based adhesives and medicines. The problem is, these exceptional sites are rare. For every one we find, thousands of others have been lost to decay. We might be seeing only the tip of an enormous iceberg of human creativity that existed throughout this period. The silence might be an artifact of preservation, not of actual human behavior. But this theory has limits too. It can't explain everything. Even granting that organic technologies are underrepresented, there are still categories of evidence that should survive and don't appear until later. Cave paintings, carved figurines, elaborate burial practices. These involve durable materials and locations that preserve well. If humans were as behaviorally modern 150,000 years ago as they were 50,000 years ago, Where are the cave paintings from the earlier period? Where are the Venus figurines? Where are the graves filled with offerings? The absence of evidence isn't proof, but so much absence is hard to ignore. This brings us to the fifth theory, the language hypothesis. What if the key missing ingredient was not intelligence or population or climate or preservation, but language itself? What if fully modern language only emerged around 50,000 years ago, and everything else followed from that? Language is the ultimate human technology. It allows us to share complex ideas, to teach sophisticated techniques, to coordinate large groups, to pass detailed knowledge across generations. Without language, each human is limited to what they can figure out themselves. With language, every human inherits the accumulated wisdom of all who came before. Some linguists believe early humans had only proto-language, something between animal communication and true language. They could convey simple concepts but not complex or abstract ones. They could communicate about the here and now but not about the past or future or hypothetical. According to this theory, a genetic mutation around 50,000 years ago enabled fully recursive language, the ability to embed ideas within ideas, to form sentences of unlimited complexity, to discuss things that don't exist, to plan for situations that haven't happened, to truly think in the way we recognize as human. The FOXP2 gene is often cited in this context. This gene is crucial for the motor control needed for speech. Humans have a unique variant of this gene that differs from all other primates. Mutations in this gene cause severe speech and language disorders. It is clearly important for language ability. But here is the problem. The human variant of FOXP2 is ancient. It appeared long before 50,000 years ago. Some evidence suggests Neanderthals had the same variant. If this gene was the key to language, and humans had it for 100,000 years before the Great Acceleration, then the gene alone cannot explain the timing. Critics also point out that language doesn't fossilize. We have no direct evidence of when fully modern language emerged. The theory is compelling, but essentially untestable. We're inferring the existence of something invisible from its supposed effects. That is not necessarily wrong, but it is not scientific proof either. The sixth theory combines several of these ideas into what some call the cultural ratchet hypothesis. The idea is that culture works like a ratchet. It can click forward, but not backward. Each innovation builds on previous ones, but for the ratchet to work, certain conditions must be met simultaneously. You need the cognitive capacity for innovation. You need enough population density to transmit innovations. You need stable enough conditions to allow experimentation. You need language complex enough to teach sophisticated techniques. And you need all of these at the same time. For 150,000 years, humans had some of these but never all at once. When one condition was met, others weren't. Populations grew during good times, but then crashed during climate disasters. Language may have been developing, but populations were too scattered for it to matter. Innovations appeared, but couldn't spread far enough or fast enough to accumulate. Around 50,000 years ago, all the pieces finally aligned. Population reached a critical threshold. Climate stabilized enough. Language complexity crossed some invisible boundary. Trade networks connected distant groups, and the ratchet finally engaged. From that moment on, culture could only accumulate. It could never be lost completely again. This theory is elegant because it explains why progress was so slow and then so fast. It wasn't a single breakthrough. It was multiple necessary conditions finally co-occurring, like a fire that needs fuel and heat and oxygen all at once. Remove any one element and the fire goes out. But even this comprehensive theory leaves questions. Why did the conditions align when they did? Was it random chance? Was it inevitable given enough time? Would it have happened eventually regardless? Or was there something special about that particular moment in history? The seventh theory is perhaps the most unsettling. What if we're overestimating the difference between before and after? What if the Great Acceleration is partially an illusion created by our closer proximity to recent events? The further back we look, the less evidence survives. The less evidence survives, the more empty history appears. Think about it this way. We have detailed records from the last few thousand years, partial records from the last 50,000, fragments from before that, and almost nothing from the deep past. Of course, recent history looks more eventful. We can actually see what happened. This doesn't mean nothing happened in those silent millennia. It means the evidence didn't survive for us to find. The apparent stagnation might be an artifact of time itself, not a reflection of what humans were actually doing. The further back we look, the more the picture fades to black. Some researchers have calculated how much evidence we should expect to survive from different periods. Their models suggest we're finding only a tiny fraction of what once existed. For every artifact we discover, thousands have been destroyed by time. The archaeological record is like reading a book with most of the pages torn out. But this theory can't explain everything either. Some categories of evidence should be equally preserved across time periods. Certain types of stone tools, specific site formations. If there was no behavioral difference, these indicators should appear with similar frequency throughout the record. They don't. The eighth and final theory is the most controversial. What if the question itself is flawed? What if dividing human history into before and after, the Great Acceleration reflects our biases more than reality? What if we're imposing a story on the past that the past doesn't actually support? Some researchers argue that the concept of behavioral modernity is ethnocentric. It defines progress according to Western European standards. Cave paintings, figurative art, complex burials. These are things Europeans did and therefore assumed to be markers of advanced cognition. But different cultures express cognitive complexity in different ways. Some emphasize visual art, others emphasize music or dance or oral tradition. Some build monuments, others leave no physical trace intentionally. Judging all human cultures by one standard may cause us to miss evidence of sophisticated thinking. This perspective suggests that humans were behaviorally modern as soon as they were anatomically modern. The apparent gap is a measurement problem, not a real phenomenon. We're looking for the wrong things in the wrong places and then concluding there is nothing to find. Where does this leave us? After examining all these theories, what can we actually conclude? The honest answer is that we don't know. Each theory explains some of the evidence, but not all of it. Each has strengths and weaknesses. The mystery remains genuinely unsolved. Perhaps all of these factors played a role. Perhaps the truth involves elements of every theory, interacting in ways we don't yet understand. Perhaps the question is more complex than any single answer could capture. Science often works this way. Simple questions reveal deep complexity. What we do know is this. For 150,000 years, humans like you and me walked this earth. They loved, they grieved, they feared, they wondered. They looked up at the same stars we see tonight and surely asked questions we still ask. They were us in every way that matters, and during all that time, something was happening. Even if we can't see it clearly in the archaeological record, even if the evidence has been lost, they were surviving, adapting, learning, passing knowledge to their children. Slowly, imperceptibly, building toward the explosion that would eventually come. The apparent silence might not be silence at all. It might be a slow burn, a gathering of kindling preparation for a fire that would eventually light up the world. The 150,000 years weren't wasted. They were necessary, the foundation on which everything else was built. And maybe that is the real lesson here. Progress isn't always visible. Growth isn't always measurable. Sometimes the most important developments happen in ways that leave no trace. The roots grow deep in darkness before the plant breaks through the soil. Think about your own life. The moments that changed you most profoundly probably aren't documented anywhere. The conversations that shifted your thinking, the realizations that came in quiet moments, the gradual accumulation of experience and wisdom. Inner development leaves no archaeological record. Perhaps those ancient humans were developing in ways we simply cannot measure. Their cultures evolving, their relationships deepening, their understanding of the world expanding, all without leaving the kinds of evidence we've been trained to look for. The stone tools stayed the same because they worked. Why fix what isn't broken? Meanwhile, everything else was changing. The songs, the stories, the relationships, the knowledge of plants and animals and seasons, the understanding of self and other, the capacity for love and grief and wonder. We call it doing nothing because we can't see what they were doing. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when the evidence we're looking for is inherently biased towards certain kinds of human activity. The silence might speak volumes if only we knew how to listen. And here is something worth considering as you drift towards sleep. You are the product of all those generations. Every one of your ancestors survived that long silent period. They faced hardships we can barely imagine: climate catastrophes, near extinction events, grinding scarcity that lasted lifetimes. They persisted. They raised children who raised children who raised children across thousands of generations, leading eventually to you. Whatever they were doing during those 150,000 years, it was enough. It was exactly enough to keep the human story going. The mystery of the long pause might never be fully solved. And perhaps that is fitting. Some questions are more valuable as questions than as answers. They keep us humble. They remind us how much we don't know about ourselves. They invite us to keep searching, keep wondering. Tonight, as you listen to these words, you are participating in something those ancient ancestors couldn't have imagined. Language transmitted across vast distances, knowledge accumulated from millions of minds. Technology that would seem like magic to anyone from 50,000 years ago, let alone 150,000, yet something connects you to them across all that time. The same curiosity that makes you wonder about the past, the same need to understand your place in the world, the same questions asked under the same stars. Human nature spans the ages unchanged. What would they think if they could see you now? If they could know that their descendants would one day hold the sum of human knowledge in their palms? That the grandchildren of their grandchildren 1,000 times over would ponder the mystery of their existence? Perhaps they wouldn't be surprised at all. Perhaps they always sensed that humans were capable of something extraordinary. Perhaps they spent those 150,000 years waiting for the moment when all the pieces would finally fall into place, knowing it would come eventually. Or perhaps they never thought about the future at all. Perhaps they lived entirely in the present, focused on survival, on the next meal, the next season, the next generation. Perhaps the future was a concept that hadn't been invented yet, another innovation waiting to emerge. We project our concerns onto the past because that is all we can do. We imagine ancient humans wondering the same things we wonder. But maybe their minds work differently in ways we can't reconstruct. Maybe the very act of asking about the long pause is uniquely modern. The 150,000-year gap teaches us something important about time itself. Scales that are incomprehensible to our daily experience. Durations that dwarf all of recorded history many times over. Depths of time in which almost anything could happen and leave no trace. 10 generations is about 250 years. That is all of American history. 40 generations takes us back 1,000 years to the Middle Ages. We can barely fathom that much time. Now multiply by 6,000. That is how many generations separate you from the beginning of the long pause. 6,000 generations of human lives. Each one complete. Each one filled with experience and emotion. Each one contributing something to the chain that leads to you. The weight of that continuity is almost too much to hold in a single thought. And yet here you are. The latest link, the current end point of an unbroken chain stretching back through all those generations, through ice ages and droughts and near extinctions, through the long silence and the great acceleration, through everything that had to happen for you to exist. If you are drifting off now, that is perfect. Let these thoughts settle like sediment in still water. The mysteries of the past are patient. They've waited 150,000 years already. They can wait until morning. They can wait until you are ready to wonder about them again. The question of why humans did nothing for so long might not have an answer. Or it might have many answers. Or the question itself might be wrong, but asking it connects you to the deepest mysteries of what it means to be human, what it has always meant to be human. Those people from 200,000 years ago would recognize you, your body, your brain, your capacity for love and fear and curiosity. They might not understand your world, but they would understand you because you are them. Just later in the story, and this is where we end for tonight, with more questions than answers, with mysteries that deepen the more we examine them, with a past that remains partially opaque no matter how hard we try to see through it, which is exactly as it should be. The not knowing is part of being human too. Our ancestors didn't have all the answers. Neither do we. Neither will our descendants. The questions persist across generations, connecting us in our shared uncertainty, uniting us in our common wonder. So rest now if you are ready. Let the mysteries wait. They've waited since before the pyramids, before the first cities, before agriculture, before art, before anything we would recognize as history. A few more hours won't matter. Sleep, dream, and perhaps in your dreams find answers we cannot reach while awake. Tomorrow the questions will still be here. The evidence will still be fragmentary. The theories will still compete. The truth will still be hidden somewhere in the depths of time. But for now, just this moment, just this breath, just this quiet contemplation at the edge of sleep. Good night. And thank you for wondering with me about what it means to be human. About where we came from, about why we are the way we are. These questions matter. Your curiosity matters. The asking itself is what makes us who we are. Sleep well, and know that whatever those ancient humans were doing for 150,000 years, part of what they were doing was making you possible. Every choice they made, every challenge they overcame, every generation they raised. All of it leading here to this moment, to you, listening in the dark, wondering about the past, being beautifully, mysteriously, inexplicably human.